It's down. It's. Are you sure? Okay. Patients follow the my name is Lily. I am with the Arizona Department of Water. How about I talk a little louder? All right. Once again, thank you for all being here tonight. My name is Lily Meeker. I'm with the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and I'm joined here by many of our staff and colleagues. And I wanted to acknowledge that we have some honored guests here with us tonight. Mayor Laws is going to welcome us in.
Good evening, everybody. Michael Laws, I'm the Mayor of Willcox. I'm just going to open the meeting. That's all I'm going to do. And then I'm going to run the call. But I want to welcome the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Thank them for coming. I thank you for coming. We understand that the water struggles everyone is dealing with, and want to let you know that we are working diligently and ensure that we all have access to precious commodity. As a city, we have received funding not only for address our citizens and residents, but neighbors as well. We're furnishing about 300 county residents daily with water right now. And we're hoping nobody turns us off because they're said they couldn't do it. AWAR is here to share science, fact, data, information to help us become the educated narrative our water issues and Willcox Basin. I do know, I recognize most of you, and I do know that we, and I'm not being ugly, I'm not. We do have people in the room that think that we have water for the next 200 years. Do we measure? If you can afford to go get it. That's a thing of my issue. As you all know, that I work for Sinful that was our panel for 20 years. So we know what the water is. We know what the solution is to fix it. And it's in your hands. You can fix it. I truly believe that you can fix it. Doesn't take us, doesn't take anybody else. Please show these individuals with respect they deserve. Unruly behavior will not be tolerated. We encourage civility as we address these issues and problems and attempt to gain as much sympathy as possible. That's what we're here for. You're here for information, the latest information that they have. Thank you all for taking the time out of your day to attend the meeting. I appreciate you coming in here, and you all know that I'm on your side. We're just trying to solve the problem. If there is one, you guys all know we lost both our wells within a week, and we were down to 8 foot of water in our tanks, which would have lasted till 6 o'clock at night, and we were done. One of the local growers happened to have a panel that cost $48,000 that we had just put in new, and it went down, which shut well one down. And so we had already taken well two out of the ground because we had brand new well one. And all of a sudden we were out of water, and it really got serious in the last 4 hours of that day. Me and a few others were up at midnight the night before trying to get this thing running. Things that you do every day. So, got our feet muddy all the way through the lead pads. So it's like, I know what you go through every day. Anyway, with that, I'd like to let these guys take the mic, and I'm going to go sit out in my car back there, and you guys wail away.
Thank you, Mayor. Now I'd like to ask Jackie, our local here in the area, to say a few remarks as well.
Hi, I'm Jackie Watkins, with Cochise County Engineering and Natural Resource Department. I'm the county engineer in the flood control district. I would like to welcome ADWR for coming here and showing us the new studies that they've done, and the people of the Willcox Basin, the residents. I've worked on and off for the county for 34 years with the state, the city of San Francisco, and ADOT. I'm a sixth generation from Southeast Arizona. My husband and I have a farm in the mill that we do raise pecans and cattle hay. I'm also the chair of the Groundwater Users Advisory Council for the Douglas AMA. So I am in the Douglas AMA, and personally, I am glad I'm in the AMA. A little bit of background on what the flood control district has done. We intentionally have projects that we've done in the San Pedro Valley for the Upper San Pedro Partnership, which is a consortium of 21 different federal, local agencies and NGOs. And we're trying to do the same thing here in the Sulphur Springs Valley for the Willcox and Douglas Basin, and to do recharge projects. And out in the Upper San Pedro Partnership, we have a Cochise Conservation Recharge Network that we have 8 different recharge projects that we've done in that basin that we've been doing since 2015. And last year, August, we had a water scenario planning workshop that was done with the ASU, the Babbitt Center for Land and Policy, and the Lincoln Institute. And out of that, we have developed the Sulphur Springs Water Alliance, and I'm sure on the back table about that. We're together with local agencies, City of Douglas, City of Willcox, and anyone else that wants to join, and we can do recharge projects in this basin. A little bit about recharge projects, so people, recharge projects are extensive. So just so the 2 of the projects that we have over in the San Pedro Valley, Horseshoe Drive is a 40-acre site with an 8-acre recharge basin that was done with a Hereford NRCD and a San Jose Ranch, John Ladd. And the construction cost of that basin is $2 million, and that was done in 2017. And today we have recharged 675 acre feet since 2017 from that basin. And the basin has an outlet, 3 36-inch CMPs, culverts, to slowly let the water flow back into the natural recharge area of the wash. We have another project, the Coyote Wash Stormwater Management Project, and we have a 2,984 branch over there that the flood control district has, that the TNC has a conservation easement on. And in 2018, we had a grant from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, the PL 566 grant, to do a watershed and plan environmental study. Then last year, 2023, we hired a design consultant to design that project. The cost of the design is $310,000, and that is to recharge up to 150 acre feet a year from the 2-year event. The cost to construct that project is $6 million, $500,000 from the flood control district funds. We have $1.5 million grant from a revenue from the Department of Defense, and a $3 million WIPA grant from the state. So we're still $1.5 million short, but I am in contact with the other agencies and hoping to get that $1.5 million, do that construction on that $6 million project next year. And that will be, when we get rain, because recharge always has to depend on the amount of precipitation you get, but that would be 150 acre feet a year. And then for this phase, for the Willcox Basin, we applied for in 2022 for a BRIC grant, which is Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. And we awarded that grant last month. The county has accepted it, and that's $250,000. And that's just to do a high-level analysis on the basin, for the whole basin, the Willcox Basin. And that will then give us a list of locations that potentially can have a recharge. And we will use the information that NDWR has done for this basin, because we use all the information that they did. That's a great help, and would really speed up the studies that we're going to do in this basin. And then we will apply for more grants for this basin to do more recharge. And then we also are working with the Willcox NRCD, Tina Thompson. She was able to get a WIPA grant to do some recharge analysis and for the upper Turkey Creek. Then the dairy has contacted us in about a year or two ago to help do some recharge studies and watershed enhancements in the lower part of Turkey Creek, that is on the east side of Kansas Settlement. And we have flood control district projects in there, and that will help decrease the amount of flood waters we get across Kansas Settlement Road to Birchwood. Grants do come with constraints and a match. Usually there's different studies you have to do. You put clearance because it's federal money. And the flood control district, we have about $1 million to do projects all over the county. But doing recharges by themselves, if there's not control on the amount of water that's being pumped out for irrigation, then it's worthless to do a recharge basin if there's not other controls in the basin. But that is not something that the county does. That is something that the state does. So we will probably have better chances of getting grants in the Douglas AMA because we do have constraints in that basin for irrigation. But once again, I want to thank ADWR for coming and for helping us to do the recharge projects that we will eventually do in the basin.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you for being a member of the GOAC and all the other countless work that you do in the basin. I'd like to welcome Ed Curry, Curry Farms, also a member of the Governor's Water Policy Council, for some additional remarks.
Thank you. Well, first off, thank everyone for being here. It's a divisive issue. It's a serious issue. There's an old saying, an old man was planting trees, knowing that he would never see the shade of them. I said, no, I think that's a problem. What we need to do will affect our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. How do we go about it wisely? How do we keep from interrupting someone's financial stability? There's a lot of work to look at this thing. I will say that this group right here, Brian, I haven't even said hi, and I haven't said hi to you. These two, I gave a hug, not because they're prettier, Ryan, but that's a whole nother subject. But I get to work with them, and I get to be by their side, and I'm telling them guys, they're here to help. They are not here to draw boundaries. They're here to give you an idea of what the basin looks like, where the troubles are, as Mayor Law said. How do we solve them? What do we do? It's complex. Those of us with the SSWA, Sulphur Springs Water Alliance, over the last year have spent a lot of effort to try to bring both sides into one room. I see Chris Franklin. Chris and his wife Michelle came by the other day. I appreciate people that are willing to come and see what our problems are. The WR has brought Bruce Holland, Ben Alternator, Paul Byron, Secretary of Ag. It's not his official term, but we'll call it that. But Paul's really good. And they've all come out. They've toured farms. I won't mention exactly the farms, but they've toured some small and they've toured some big to understand this picture. So what I'm telling you is this group comes to us well educated about our situation, well educated about giving us at least an idea of where it's at. We desperately, last night at our SXWA and the Homer sitting here in front of me, and we talked about it a lot. In 1980, the first AMAs were established in Arizona. I have the blessing of knowing and working with some of the attorneys that first helped establish that back in 1980. As you can imagine, their hair is more silver than mine. That's possible. They're long in the tooth, is what I'm saying, but they have lots of wisdom. Had they not established the AMAs and put some guidelines, they would have we would never have the CAP, which brought in some $4.4 billion in the early 1980s to pump water 300 miles uphill. What I'm saying to you is we all know that now, you remember, those of us that are natives, when Tucson first started using it, there were some complaints and stuff, and today, you don't hear anything about it except for thinking. My point is here in the Willcox, Douglas, Bowie, Saxon, Basin, and I include Bowie and Saxon because oftentimes they get left out. I'm not saying that I know that an AMA is best. What I am saying is that we need to draw some kind of plan so that we can receive funding possibly to help establish retired acres from farming, much like what's that program called? CRP. Much like that. Guys, there's ways to do it. But until we set a plan, as long as we say pump it till it's gone, we will receive no help. That's my point. There's possibilities of a domestic irrigation system to take water across this valley, much like we have electricity, way out in unseen areas that are hardly traveled. It's possible. The dream, all you gotta do is dream it. That's all. I think the plan in place, is very important. So as you hear these folks out, and each one of them, I introduced Nicole to a couple of them. Nicole, I sat by her in meetings, and she's very helpful. And I promise you, these individuals are not here to draw lines, to take our water, or to take our life. They're here to figure out how can we do it wise, how can we do it in a manner that has wisdom. And there's a lot of wisdom right here. I will close with a genetic reading that which I do. There's cytoplasm and cerebellum. Simply put, you can stop a generation from being passed on. Simply by taking a male sterile plant and having to make sure there's no pollen. All I want to say is if we don't set a plan, we have a productive sterilized future generation for water. It's important.
Thank you, Ed. I want to thank Mayor Laws and Dr. again as well for his really important remarks and for the warm welcome to us tonight. I also want to just take a moment to thank the staff of the community center for helping set this up. They're incredible and they put a lot of hard work into making this happen this evening, so thank you. With that, I also want to acknowledge we have some electeds in the room. I see Representative Griffin. If there's any other electeds that would like to just raise their hand or say hello, thank you for being here tonight as well. So again, the purpose of this meeting is to provide presentations on the hydrology in the Willcox groundwater basin and on water management options. We'll have ample time for questions after from the public, both in person and online. And again, if anyone is communicating with other folks that are having trouble, the password is Willcox lowercase. Some logistics for tonight. We have up on the screen here. This night's meeting is not a formal public hearing. Again, this is an informational session. This meeting will be recorded and available online on EWR's website. There will be time again for those public questions at the end of this informational session, and questions may be limited to a certain amount of time per speaker. If you would like to ask a question, please fill out a speaker card located at the entrance and return it to EWR staff. Online attendees should complete the questionnaire that's been provided in the WebEx link. The link is in the chat, and you can fill that out, and we'll be sure to include your questions as well. Next slide. So beginning with some introductions again, my name is Lynn Meeker, and I'm the program supervisor for AWR, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Ryan Mitchell, AWR's chief hydrologist, Nicole Clovis, AWR's chief legal counsel, and Natalie Mast, AWR's AMA's director. And we will now hand it off to Ryan Mitchell, AWR's chief hydrologist, to provide the overview of hydrology of the Willcox groundwater basin.
Hi, thanks everybody. I'm going to sit over here so that I can advance the slides. But first I wanted to thank everyone for the welcome that we've had tonight. Appreciate being greeted with open arms. We are here to provide hydrologic data and information. As the chief hydrologist, I oversee the hydrology department or division at AWR, and the hydrology department has a whole staff of engineers, geologists, and hydrologists to collect the data, we analyze the data. We have the groundwater monitoring network, we have the geophysics and surveying units, we have the automated groundwater monitoring group as well, and the groundwater flow modeling unit underneath the hydrology group. So we're kind of the technical nerdy branch of the department, so I won't be discussing personally any policy or legislation. I'm here just to get data, which is, for me, a bit easier. So the agenda for my section tonight, I'll give a brief regional overview of the Willcox Basin, discuss some of the AWR index wells, what they are and how they're distributed. We'll briefly go over water budgets and what they are. Give a little bit of background on our 2018 groundwater flow model that we have for the Willcox Basin. Go over some groundwater level change statistics that we have for the basin as well. And then we'll touch on some existing data. So these are things that we know about the basin. First, we have index well measurements, so we'll go into some detail there. This is just a high-level summary of what we'll cover. We'll get into the weeds in a moment. We have some discharge measurements in the basin, some water level trends that we've analyzed, and the water level difference contours when we look at the change in time in the water table. And we also have a lot of land subsidence and earth fissure data that we'll go over tonight as well. So the regional overview, the Willcox Basin is an extensional alluvial basin, meaning there are mountain ranges on each side, and there was a tectonic extension, so it created this down drop basin that got filled in with like sand and gravel, and that's characteristic of the basin and range physiographic province. There's a large evaporative playa in the middle of the basin, the Willcox playa. It's a remnant of the Lake Cochise. The elevation of the basin, we have an elevation of about 4,000 feet at the playa, so that is in the middle of the basin. That's the lowest elevation within the boundary of the Willcox Basin. And we get all the way up close to 1,100 feet near Mount Graham. There is some surface water that occurs in the basin, especially after rain or storm events. And that surface water is internally draining, meaning it, wherever it lands on the mountains will typically be redirected through arroyos and streams towards the center of the basin and then ultimately into the playa, and it is towards the playa. And there's a lot of groundwater here, but the groundwater is below the surface, contained within the sand and gravels that fill the basin. And so there are, it's very mythology, meaning there's fine grained stuff, coarse grained stuff, sands, gravels, clays, it's very mixed in this basin. The major aquifer units in the basin are typically found in these alluvial basin fill deposits. There's also stuff called cuspine deposits, which are old lake bed sediments. There are some varying hydrostratigraphic units. What that means is even within the aquifer, there's some variation. Some areas have high conductivity, the water moves good, it moves really well. Some areas the water doesn't move nearly as fast, and that has to do with the grain size of the formation. And in those conditions, when you have coarse grained sands and gravels, and also the fine grained clay type units, you can have sometimes confined conditions, meaning that you have an aquifer system that's under pressure from the overlying material above it. So it's a really dynamic, interesting, and diverse ecologically. The basin itself gets about 10 to 12 inches of precipitation annually. And as you move up in elevation towards the mountains, the annual precipitation values go up, so about 14 to 18 inches. So this was just a quick snapshot overview of the Willcox Basin, and then we'll get into some more specifics. This map here shows the ATWR index wells. So we have, as a department, as a state agency, we have 1,700 wells across the state, a little more than that actually, that the folks in my division will go out and measure by hand. These are field geologists and hydrologists and engineers, and they're trained on how to do this and collect the high quality data using calibrated sounders. Right, we have 1,700 across the state. This is the distribution. You can see different colored dots on that map. The different colors just represent how frequently those wells are measured. So the blue dots, we measure them once a year. The green dots are twice a year. The red dots that you can see are 4 times a year. And then we do have some that are measured monthly in orange. There's not that many of those. In addition to these index wells, this is a data that we have across the whole state. Any measurement that we collect, whether it be a water level, discharge, anything at all, any data we collect goes into a database that anyone here can access. This link at the bottom of your screen will take you to an interactive web map, kind of like Google Earth or Google Maps. And you can zoom in, look around the state, and you can see what wells we have. You can click on any of them, and you can see all of their water levels. So all of the data that we collect gets updated nightly. Additional existing data that we have for the basin. So 1,700 index wells throughout the state that are regularly measured. Within Willcox itself, we have 52 active index wells. And what makes it an index well means we've surveyed the location, we've surveyed the elevation, we have a access agreement with the landowner, the well owner, and we're allowed to come and collect these water levels once a year. Right now we have 52. We always want more. So if anyone is willing to have a well, look for wells that are not pumping, so unused wells that you have on your property that we can access the water level, we would love to come out. Contact me after the meeting. Of the 52 active index wells that we have, 4 of them are equipped with equipment called electrical equipment called transducers, and they record multiple readings per day, and they upload that every night. So we actually have regular automated data from a few of them. We're always looking to increase that number as well. So if anyone wants to, has an old spare well, they're hard to come by, but if you have one, let me know. In addition to the regularly visited index wells, those 52 wells, every once in a while, we'll get all of our field guys together and we'll go into a particular groundwater basin all at once. We'll contact literally everybody who has a well ownership registration with us and ask them if we can grab a water level from their well on one big pop. So we call those basin sweeps. So we'll come in with a dozen, 2 dozen guys. We'll get as many measurements as we can in as short of a time period as we can, just days or maybe a week or 2. And the reason why we do that is because then it can give us a really good picture, a snapshot of the aquifer right at that moment. In the Willcox Basin, we've done that in 1990, 94, 99, 05. Over the 2014-15 measurement was during December to January, so it still happened within a week or two. And then 2021. And in these basin sweeps, the 6 sweeps here, we collected over 4,600 water level measurements. So we do have a lot of water level data, because water levels are one of the things that we can measure. What we don't have in the Willcox Basin are reported pumping values. So when you don't know how much pumping is occurring, you can only, what we have access to is just what is the water table doing, what's the aquifer doing. In the early 80s, we were able to get access to a lot of discharge pumping wells from local farmers, and we were able to measure over 200 pumping discharge measurements. So we were able to calibrate people's flow meters for them and do a discharge test with them. In 62 of those cases, we had an access port that let us get the water level while it was pumping. So that's different than a static water level, that's a pumping water level. And that lets you calculate something called specific capacity, which is a function of how good your well is performing, but it also tells us something about the hydraulic conductivity of the aquifer. So for us, it does give us some aquifer data, aquifer characteristics. In addition to these water level measurements and all of this water level data, we do have land subsidence measurements, which we'll look at a few maps in a moment. And the AZGS, Arizona Geological Survey, does do a lot of earth fissure mapping. So as earth fissures open up at the surface, they will come out, survey them, and map them. And all of that is looked at collectively as the available existing data for the basin. Currently, at the moment, there are no active USGS stream flow gauges. Those are the surface gauges. There were a couple that were active until the 90s, but the flow is so intermittent, ephemeral, doesn't flow all the time. And so a lot of those gauges lost funding over the years. I'd like to see some gauges installed in the future in this area. Stream gauge data is very valuable. One other tool that we have for the Willcox Basin is in 2018, the department published a groundwater flow model for the basin for Willcox. This link here, anyone can click on it and can take you to the report for that model. And the way the model works is we create, since we don't have, like I said, we don't know the pumping values, we don't know a lot of information around the basin. So if we can create a digital version of the aquifer, a model of it, that gives us more information than we had before. And the model will be calibrated to match all of the water level data that we have, because we have thousands of data points for that. And in this groundwater flow model calibration, we took the period, or we were able to simulate the period between 1940 all the way through 2015 and match all those water level trends that we saw over that 75-year period. And the reason why that's meaningful is here we have a map on the right side. It's showing, some lines, the contour lines. Anywhere that you see a continuous contour line, it's like a bathtub ring. So that means that one line represents a single depth or a single number all the way around. And if you see a bunch of lines in one spot, that means you've got like a local cone of depression, we call it. So the area that's declining more than others. It's similar to if you're looking at a topography map of like land elevation, but now we're looking at water level instead. And here's an image that shows how in the Kansas settlement area, we had that the model was simulating over 400 feet of decline in the water table from 1940 to 2015. What that means to us is that it actually matches the water level measurements that we have been collecting. So to us, this means the model is performing, it's actually matching real world conditions. And when we do that, it goes online, can you hear me too? When we do a model, we can actually not only match the water level information, then we can actually pull out additional details. So one of the details we like to find out is, all right, we matched all the water level data for the 75-year period. How much water was actually withdrawn from the basin? And there is water going in, there's water going in as recharge, but there's also water coming out through pumping. And when we do the math and the calculations from this model, we show that in that 75-year period, 5.7 million acre feet of groundwater was mined for storage within the aquifer system. And an acre foot, for folks who don't know, is if you have a 1 acre of land and you covered it with 1 foot of water, that's an acre foot worth of water. So 5.7 million acre feet of groundwater is a non-trivial volume of water. It's a lot of water. If we were to stop all pumping today, right now, and everyone in the valley just disappeared, and we let the basin recharge on its own naturally, per the calibrated recharge values in the model, it would take over 280 years to get that 5.7 million acre feet of water back. So let that sit for a moment because it's a large number. It's going to take nearly 3 centuries to recover the pumping that was done in 75 years. So this leads in nicely to this slide. The reason why it's significant to know what is coming into your aquifer system and what is leaving is so that you can do something that's called a water budget. And water budgets, as the first bullet says, they're very simple in concept, but they're really difficult in practice to do because there's so many variables, so many things. You can't know everything across the basin, right? But if we take a look at this equation, I'll make it really simple. There's an equal sign here, and on one side of the equal sign, we have P, which equals precipitation. So this is going to be the stuff coming in, rainfall, snow, all the precipitation that's being introduced into the basin. Plus, we have a value called Q, and Q is just a hydrology term for flow. So the water that's flowing into the watershed, that can be surface water, that could be groundwater from basin to basin, any water that's coming in. So now we've got basically if you look at this as a financial budget, those are our paychecks and our money coming in. On the other side of that equation, we have a value called ET. ET stands for evapotranspiration. So it's the combination of natural evaporation plus what plants use and consume, because plants do take water and convert it. We have another figure here, a variable here, it's called delta S. Delta just means change, and S is storage. So the delta S value is going to be how much money you have in your bank. That's your balance. And then we have the Q out. So anything that's leaving, that can be surface river. If water comes in, and that water also leaves the basin. You have to keep that into account. It could also be underflow from one basin to another basin. So like I said, it seems kind of simple in concept, but it's a little harder to quantify, especially for a large basin like Willcox. But in general, let's take a look. This will actually help illuminate. Let's zoom in on just one little area of the aquifer. And the reason why I have this schematic diagram here is just to show there's so much that happens in the basin. You've got trees, plants, you have rainfall, you have mountains, there's just so much variability across the basin. But to understand the concept of a water budget and how it affects the water level, we're going to zoom in onto a little block. So this is a hydrologic block diagram. It's just a fancy way of saying it's a schematic. It's a cartoon, basically. And on one side, we have water budget on top. On the left side, we have inflows. So like I said, anything that's coming in. So that's precipitation, surface water, groundwater, any imported water coming in from somewhere else, any runoff from the mountains that's coming into the basin, any artificial recharge, just anything that's coming into the system that adds to the total water in the aquifer. And on the other side, we have all the outflows, primarily groundwater pumping. There's also evapotranspiration, that ET value we're talking about. Then any surface water outflows or groundwater outflows. And this might seem intuitive or simple, but it's important to know before we look at the next 6 slides. But if your inflows, so the water coming into the aquifer, are greater than your outflows, and you have a well that you're measuring the water level at, like this diagram has, if your inflows are greater than your outflows, you will measure a water level within the well that's rising over time. It seems intuitive, but that is what we need to look at because we want to know what the aquifer is doing. We want to know if this is equilibrium. Is your water budget okay, right? But also conversely, if your outflows are larger than your inflows, and we're measuring the water level within the well, we will see that water level going down over time. So another way that we look at how the aquifer system as a whole is doing is by taking all those water level measurements that those field guides collect, the ones that are annual, the basin sweeps, all of it, and we want to look at it over time statistically. We want to see, hey, are these wells going up? Are the wells going down? How many are going up? How many are going down by how much? We just want to understand the information of the data. And an easy way to, instead of showing you guys this big table full of a gazillion numbers that you would have a hard time even understanding what you're looking at. This is a couple of slides that we presented to the Governor's Water Policy Council last fall. There's an open file report that we publish every year. We update it every year as we collect more water level data year after year. We keep updating it. And in that publication, the open file report, OFR, the blue hyperlink here will take you to it. We have a bunch of tables in the back that kind of boil the data down and simplify it. And one of the tables, table 6, is saying we want to look at what the water measurements were doing in the year 2000 and then in the year 2020. So over 20 years, because you can't just look at a 1 year or 2 year difference. You want to look at the big trend. And we said, all right, any wells that we have measured between 2000 and 2020, let's put them into a table and let's find the statistics on them. And then as a way to visualize the statistics, is we use something called a box and whisker plot. It's a way of taking a bunch of numbers and putting them into a little icon. It's a bit easier to understand. We made a box and whisker plot for every basin across the state, so all 51 basins, and we presented them to the Governor's Water Policy Council. And there were a few of the basins that stood out that I'll show on the next slide. But just to quickly understand what a box and whisker plot is, if I took all the data from that 20-year period of record and lined them up from smallest to largest, and I cut them up into 4 parts, those are quartiles. That's what the box and whisker represents. The upper quartile, so the 25% of the data on the high end will be up above the box where this whisker is. Then you have the median to this upper quartile, mid quartile range here. This is the 25% from 50 to 25%, and then from 0 to 25%. Essentially, you just lined it up and then broke them into quarters. And that tells us just at a glance, are all the levels going up or going down? Like, what are they doing? In addition to the quartiles that are broken out, we always will have a little X on here too, which is if you just average them all, where would the average fall? And because data is kind of tricky sometimes, occasionally you have outliers. So all the measurements are all like 10 feet, 10 feet, 10 feet, 10 feet. They have one that's like 300 feet. We don't want to ignore it because it's a real measurement. But we do flag and say, hey, that's there. It's a real data point, but it's an outlier. So that's what those represent. So we did this for every basin. And 3 basins that are currently unregulated, they're not an ANA, they're not an INA, stood out as being severe decline or priority basins. And so here you can see the box and whisker plots for Gila Bend, Redecker's Plain, and Willcox. So you can see how the shape of the box or whisker kind of gives you an idea, are all the data clustered together, or the data spread apart? Is it all approximately the same value? So it kind of gives you a visual representation of what would be a huge sheet, just numbers. But what's important to know is that even the smallest amounts of water level decline, all the way to the larger volumes of decline of the wells that we had in that 20-year period of record, they're all below 0, meaning they're all had that 20-year period. And some of the other basins were right on the 0 line. We have some that go up, some that went down. The variety is very mixed. But in these basins, especially here in Willcox, all of the points of the statistics were showing us negative, meaning none of them went up over that 20-year period. On the right-hand side is a map that shows where these basins fall in Arizona. And the pink little blobs that you see within the basin boundaries are actually mapped lands of site features. So the reason why it matters to know if the water level is going up or going down is because of what we were discussing about water budgets. So when I say, hey, we might not know what the pumping is out here because it's not regulated, it's not reported, but we do know what the water levels are doing. We measure those, we can see those. And when they're all going down, that tells you that the aquifer system as a whole is not in equilibrium. The outflows are exceeding the inflows, right? Like we were looking at that one block diagram that showed it going up or going down. It's going down, right? So the next few slides here, we're going to look at some hydrographs of wells throughout the basin. And on the map side here on in red is the boundary of the Willcox Basin. The pink shapes that you see inside, that's the land subsidence features, the boundaries of the land subsidence features. The blue dots are where the index well locations are, so that tells you where the wells are that we use for this analysis. The link here at the bottom takes you to that groundwater site inventory and interactive web map that I spoke about before. So like I said, I encourage everyone here to just click on the link and check it out. You can zoom in, you can look around, and you can see all of these data. When you click on the blue dot, when you're looking through that web map, a pop-up will come up and it'll say hydrograph. In other words, do you want to look at what the water table is in there for that well? And if you click on the hydrograph link, you will see this. So here we're looking at a well in the north part of the basin. And a hydrograph is just a plot of the water level over time. So on the bottom, we have the date of when these measurements were recorded. This first measurement was from 1969. And here you can see, hey, that we're coming out pretty frequently. That's about every year. We'll come out and grab a reading, right? So we're able to look at this in this particular well. We have several decades of data of water level data. On the bottom, like I said, is the date. On the left-hand side is the depth to water. So that's the measurement you would get if you had a measuring tape standing at the surface and you just drop it down until it feet into the water. How far down below your feet is it? On the right-hand side is the water level elevation. So in other words, left-hand side is how many feet below you before you hit the water. The right-hand side is if this were the elevation of a surface, what is its elevation above sea level? They tell you the exact same thing, but it's just a different number. It's usually easier for people to think of depth of water. So first measurement here in 1969, the depth of water was 335 feet BLS into below land surface. We typically do the index wells in Willcox in October, November. That's usually the time of the year that our field guys, you'll see them driving around. So this measurement, this last one here was from last October, and its depth of water was 458 feet. So when you don't know, when you can't really quantify all of the inflows or all of the outflows, and you use the water level trend as a diagnostic data point, we're looking at is it declining or not, what's going on. And here we have 123 feet of decline in 55 years. So that's it's a lot of groundwater depletion in this part of the basin. And it averages out to a rate of about 2.2 feet per year. We're going to move down the basin a little bit further. So here's the yellow dot now. So we went from this guy. Now we're down into the subsidence feature area. First measurement, so still a hydrograph. First measurement is from 1965. Second one from last fall, last winter. This one is showing 209 feet in 58 years, for a rate of about 3.6 feet per year. Moving further south, we see this well. I was going to also point out, all of these hydrographs, they have a site ID on the bottom. So if you guys want to look at this again later yourselves, you can actually just type the ID in to the map and it'll take you right to the well. You don't have to go before it. But here, this well, first reading was in 1954. Last reading last fall, last winter. This was 116 feet in 69 years. So all of these water levels are trending down, right? Here we have now gone south of the playa, and Similar trend, we have a measurement from 1954 and a measurement from 2022. But one thing to note when looking at a hydrograph like this is this left side, the scale here is not tens of feet. The scale here is actually hundreds of feet. So this well actually has 368 feet of decline in 68 years, or about 5.4 feet per year. Here, a similar trend. So also a lot of these wells in the Kansas settlement area, you'll see this like little sinusoidal wiggle part to it. What this actually represents is that there was aggressive farming in the 60s and into the 70s out here. And then there was actually a big slowdown in farming here in the 70s. And going into the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of rainfall, precipitation, very bad around here. Those are all favorable conditions. So we see the water table kind of recover a little bit, it's trying to flatten out, but then it starts to go back down again. Because ever since the late 90s, we've been in a multi-decade mega drought across the whole state, across the whole Southwest. But you can really see it here in the water sample data. So here, this well, first measurement 42 feet in 1953, 444 feet in 2023. So this one has 402 feet of decline in 68 years, or a rate of about 5.7 feet per year on average. If we move a bit over to the western side of the Kansas settlement area, closer to the Cochise stronghold, we see a measurement here in 1954, one from last year, 205 feet of decline in 69 years. And then if we jump back further south now, we're on the southeastern portion of the basin. This one is interesting. You can really see, because this is close to mountain recharge, because it's closer to the mountains here, that it really responded to the precipitation that we had in the 90s. But there was also a dramatic slowdown on ag pumping as well in this area. But what's noteworthy, we were looking at wells up here showing 100 or 200 feet, 115, 120 feet of drawdown in 60 years, 7 to 50, 60 years. This well showed 114 feet of drawdown in just 15 years. Then there was some recovery of the aquifer system here. And if we look again at just this later, 13 years, we have another 111 feet in just 13 years. That's really rapid. These are some steep declining rates, and they are, 7.6 and 8.5. Those are really, really high rates of decline in feet per year. But overall, from the 1966 measurement to last year, there's a 228 feet of decline as well. So next, another way of looking at this water level trend, looking at these data, is to think of, if you look at the entire water table and you had a surface board and you come back later and do another basin sweep. Like I was telling you, we come with all of our guys, we do snapshots of the aquifer. Then when you look at it and say, how has it changed from the old sweep to this most recent sweep? Are there areas that are declining more than other areas? Like, what is the water level change? And that's what this map is showing. And any contour line you see here, like before, is a single value. This particular contour line is about 75 feet. And this is from 1990 to 2021. But what you can notice is that there's a bullseye type shape in the Kansas settlement area. And what that means is that there's a whole lot of change in water level in this 31-year period. The water level before was here, now in this area it's much deeper. And in this 31-year period between the basin sweeps, we had over 200 feet of water level decline in this area right here. And as we said before, all of these slides will be posted and online available, and you guys can always talk to me if you want to get more information. But this is another way of us looking at what are the water level trends doing to understand what's happening to the aquifer system as a whole. Another thing that we like to look at are dry wells. Are there wells that are going dry or not? And where are they? This first map, I have two maps to show you guys. This first one is When one of my field hydrologist guys goes out to collect a measurement at a well that we have been collecting measurements in for years, and he shows up to take this measurement at one of our index wells, and it's empty, then he flags it. So this is not reported data from anyone here in the public. This is from our field hydrologist going out and verifying, hey, this well used to have water. In the Willcox Basin, since we've been measuring water levels, there have been 71 wells that have gone dry that our guys have gone out to see. And I say, that's great, it's good information, but what about, just more recently? Because this could go back to some of these measurements are going back to the 40s. So I want to know what's happening now. Of the 71 dry wells on this map, 29 of them actually, so 40% of them have gone dry in the last 10 years, meaning that more of them are going dry recently, right? You can report a dry well of your own. So here is a link and a QR code. If you have a well on your property, you buy property that has a dry well on it, you just want to let us know, hey, there's a well that's here, it is dry or has recently gone dry. We'd like to know that data too, like to have that information. I did ask, I wanted to find out how many self-reported dry wells we've had in the Willcox Basin, and there's only been one. So please, if you have any that you want to report to us, please do so. It's all valuable data to me. Another thing to look at are the well permits. So this is a plot that shows a bar chart. And on the bottom, we have the year. So this first bar here is from 1998, and this one here is from 2024, so this current year. And we have this bar chart for every year, and there's two colors. There's a light blue and a dark. The light blue color are exempt wells. Exempt wells to us are small diameter, low pumping rate, typically domestic or stock wells. They're not the big, they're 35 gallons per minute or less, 10 acre feet per year or less, they're the small ones. The dark blue are going to be the large diameter, big pumpers, big boomers, so ones that can produce thousands of gallons per minute. And what's interesting to see when you look at this plot, I wanted to know what permits are being requested from year to year, how many of them are exempt and how many of them are not exempt, right? And if we look at 1998 up until about 2010, there were 990 exempt wells, so small domestic wells, and about 145 non-exempt wells. From 2011 until now, there's only 552 exempt wells and 711 non-exempt wells. So there's a dramatic increase in the large scale production wells that are being permitted or being requested. So that is another data point for us too. We're looking at the system, the aquifer system as a whole. And then to get to the more exciting part of my presentation is the subsidence, land subsidence, and earth fishery. I know you guys deal with these daily. You're in one of the most dynamic land subsidence areas in the entire state. It's here in the Willcox Basin. I have a lot of information for you here on what it is, how we measure it, what are earth fissures, how they form. So some more entertaining slides coming up if you're wanting to learn how these things actually progress and what they mean. So land subsidence is, as it sounds, it's the lowering of the land surface. But the question is how and why. And it happens as a function of dewatering. So here's how it actually works. This is another hydrologic block diagram. So just imagine this is the land surface. This is the sand and the gravel, and it's in the silts and clays that make up the basin fill material. And this blue dashed line is the water table. Anything here that's below in blue is saturated. That sand and gravel is all the interstitial pore space is filled with water. And if we were to look at just a perfect cubic foot, just take a chunk of it out, teleport it to the surface, and take a look at it, we would see something kind of like this. We've got big pieces of sand and gravel, small, fine pieces, big mixed up. We all mix with all kinds of stuff. And in that little tiny space between all the sand grains, there would be water. And just like when you go into the deep end of the pool or go down deep in the lake, how your ears can pop, that's because there's something called hydrostatic pressure. The deeper you go, the more pressure the water exerts, it pushes against you. It actually happens in the aquifer as well. So when you're down in the saturated alluvium, the saturated sand and gravel, that water that's in the pore space is actually pushing back against the sand grains a little bit. There's the lithostatic pressure, which is the weight of the sand and the soil, but there's also the hydrostatic pressure, which is the water pushing back. And what happens when you lower the water table, de-water that sand and gravel, there is now no longer hydrostatic pressure keeping that pore space pushed open. And the formation will compress because it doesn't want to leave a little vacuum of air. So as the water leaves, the sand compacts a bit tighter, defined with the silts and the clays and the sands. And what used to be a cubic foot before of sand and gravel with water mixed in is now a flat box. It is no longer a perfect cubic foot anymore. It is slightly squished. This is the mechanism that causes land subsidence. So first you have to have the saturated sand and gravel. You have to have the aquifer there first, and then you have to de-water it enough that it starts to compress the pore space in between the sand grains. And when that happens over tens of feet or hundreds of feet of water level depletion, and you get enough of that cubic box slightly compressing, because you got a whole bunch of them, you now start to see the surface going down. The elevation at the land surface is lowering. And that means a diagnostic feature, meaning when we see the land going down, we know the mechanism that causes it is groundwater mining. That's what does it. This is the physics of how it works. The problem with land subsidence, especially as it pertains to an aquifer, is if I were to put the water, it won't rise because water might be good at keeping the pressure when it's already there, but you can't re-inflate and it can't lift the weight of the soil above it. It's not strong enough for that. And so whenever you have something that's squished, there's an inelastic component and an elastic component. The elastic part is how much of it will bounce back, and then inelastic means it doesn't bounce back once you deform it, it stays deformed. Land subsidence is almost, not entirely, but almost entirely elastic, which means that recharging will not reverse the compression. It is therefore a permanent loss of aquifer storage, because even if the water level came back up, that cubic foot is no longer a cubic foot, it's holding less water now. So the volume of water the aquifer can even hold has now gone down. You've squeezed or run that sponge out, and you're not going to let it reinflate. A compressed sponge can't hold that much water. Right? So another question that we get a lot is, well, how do you know, or how do you measure it, or like, how can you tell? Because when the whole area is going down to you, nothing is different if you're standing at the surface. So the answer to that is that we actually use satellites. So we use synthetic aperture radar, which is just a fancy way of saying that we have multiple satellites that send a radar beam down, and we map it so that it goes over these basins. And we take a reading during one pass, and we get sub-millimeter precision on the elevation. And then we come back at a later time, and we go over it again, and we look to see what's changed. And then we do that over and over, and we end up being able to see, well, the mountains actually are going down. Certain areas aren't really fall, but other areas are. So there's deformation happening in those areas. So this is how we measure and how we map the subsidence. There are multiple satellites that we use, 7 of them. The map on the right that has all the different colored boxes are showing you their flight paths. Those are the areas that we have them collect readings for us multiple times per year. The INSAR program, that's the synthetic aperture radar program, has multiple stakeholders that support the program. So it's not just us. We have federal, state, county, water districts, even private water companies. There are a lot of people that want us to make these measurements and then process the data afterwards, because it's post-processing that we do from the satellite data that gives us the subsidence maps that we're going to look at in a second. But right here on the right is a map that shows all of the subsidence in the last 13 years across the whole state. The darker the color, the greater the subsidence. And in the entire state, the Willcox Basin right over here has the most land subsidence that we've seen in the last 13 years. So here is a map where we added a picture here because we're looking just at Willcox, but this is a 14-year period. Like I said, the darker color means the greater the subsidence amount, the more subsidence has been measured. And in the last 14 years, there's been 120 to 140 centimeters, so that's about 47 to 55 inches of subsidence in just the last 14 years. So it's like 4 feet, almost 5 feet worth of subsidence. And this is only 14 years. This is not over 68 or 70 years. And remember, we just saw how the subsidence happen. It happens when you dewater the aquifer and the material compresses, right? But in addition to what's the total amount of subsidence, what's the total number of displacement, one thing that I think is really interesting or telling too is what is the rate of subsidence. So this map here is from a 1-year period, how much subsidence occurred in 1996. So we're going to go back and look for a few decades ago and say how much, what was the rate of subsidence? Basically, how fast are you going? And back in 1996, there was 1 to 3 centimeters of subsidence, and not even across the whole basin in certain areas. And then I said, well, let's look at this last year, the last 12 months. In the last 12 months, just in the last year alone, there's been 7 centimeters of subsidence, or almost 3 inches. So the rate is increased, meaning the subsidence rate is speeding up. If, like I was saying before, if we were to all disappear and be gone tomorrow and no more pumping happened, the land here would continue to subside for several decades before it stabilized again. So this is a big problem and something that obviously we need to be looking at. So let's take a look at some subsidence photos and features around the Willcox Basin. This is Brian Conway. He's the manager of our geophysics surveying unit. He is the INSAR guru we have at the state, very brilliant geophysicist. And he's sitting here holding a pole that shows that since 1969, the land surface elevation has gone down by 11.5 feet. Another indication, because people say satellites, we don't know what satellites are telling you, that's just digital information, right? Well, one thing that you can see with your own eyeballs are what we call floating well pads. So a floating well pad like this is you drill, you install the well, when you're getting ready to equip it with your pump, you pour your cement pad in and you're finished. And that's usually when you put your oil tank on your discharge head, or you use it as a stability footing, right, for your well, for you to put your pump equipment on. If the land is subsiding and compacting and going down, but the casing is rigid and it's sticking up still, and then you're basically squishing a sandwich and your toothpick is still sticking up, right? This well pad was on the surface when it was first poured and installed, and now this one is actually about 30 inches off the ground, so it's actually mid-thigh. It's pretty high. Now, that doesn't mean that there's only been 30 inches of subsidence since this well was installed and the pad was poured, because down in the well itself, wherever there's a significant subsidence, the well casing will usually fail somewhere below the surface, and it's like you're pressing a soda can. It will compress and crinkle, and you will have casing failure somewhere below you. That's why this one has a pump on it. But this is just another piece of visual evidence that you can see around the Willcox Basin of an artifact of land subsidence. So here's another one. This was a large little pad that couldn't support its own weight, so it broke after the supporting soil below it dropped too far enough. Here's another one. Here's a different one. These are all different wells. And these are from the north half of the basin and Camp Selma as well. So this is some diagnostic piece that you can look at with your eyes and say, okay, yeah, the soil itself is compressing. One thing that happens when you have land subsidence is you must have land subsidence, which is from the water in the aquifer, right? To have earth fissures. And if you live here in Willcox, you know that there are earth fissures in this basin. This map here is just showing the basin. I'm going to click one button, little black lines show up. I'll zoom in so you can see them better, but those little black lines are all the mapped earth fissures that the AZGS maps. And they map all the time. New earth fissures open up all the time, usually after a rain event. And since July of 2023, their database they have published, they have about 48 miles worth of earth fissures in the Willcox Basin. Here, to zoom in just a little bit so you can see northern half and southern half. The left side is the southern half, or southern portion. It's the Kansas settlement subsidence feature. You can see all those red lines. There's a lot over by Coach's Stronghold. There's a lot over here as well. Parker Ranch Road area. And over here, the Fort Grant Road feature, we have several long, if you notice, they're all kind of long straight lines, right? And they mirror the outcropping bedrock. And there's a reason for that. I'm going to tell you in a second about it. But like I said, about 50 miles worth, and I know that number's gone up since last summer. So how do they form? What are earth fissures? And this is another cartoon or schematic diagram of a basin. So the brown paper bag looking stuff, consider that bedrock, like mountains. And then all this stuff here in the middle is your sand, your gravel, your basin fill material. This blue line is the water table. And just how mountains have irregular surfaces, they're not perfectly flat when you see them above the basin. They're also not flat below the sediments either. Like the surface is irregular down below you. And it's that irregular surface that actually determines where the fissures will open up and how they function. So we're going to zoom in on the edge here, where the bedrock that's below the alluvium, so below the sand and the gravel, the bedrock has a little localized high, a little peak or a ridge or something, but it's below the basis fill. This is what you need to have, or the typical conditions you need to have for fissures to start. So here's the sequence, or here's how it goes. Pumping of the groundwater causes the water table to decline. You now have soil and little blocks of material that used to be saturated, but must not, and it's compressing, so subsidence occurs. But there's a local bedrock ledge that's not letting all of it subside together like it wants to do. And so when you have a little high point that's keeping one side up while the other side wants to keep dropping, you actually create like a pulling motion. And when you do that, you create a lateral stress. And where you have that lateral stress, you start to get hairline cracks that radiate up from that under the soil ridge line. So let's zoom in here and see what happens. So another, block cartoon. So remember we have groundwater mining, overdraft, overpumping, dewatering of the formation, subsidence starts to happen. And there's one side that can't subside because there's a ledge holding it up, and one side that wants to go down. You create lateral stresses through pulling horizontally on the soil. Hairline cracks start to form. This tension cracks. Now there could be miles and miles and miles of hairline cracks that you could never see, and they would never show up, and they'd never be a problem. But if it rains and you get surface water, the surface water will infiltrate the cracks. The water will actually go into the cracks preferentially because it's a way for it to get downhill, right? Water likes to go downhill. And when it does that and it passes through those cracks, it'll actually start eroding the hairline crack and moving the material out of the way. And it creates like small little openings or void spaces under the ground that you don't know are there. Now, it doesn't happen after one rain event. You have to have it over and over and over again. So over time, more surface water will come in, more water will go into these cracks. It'll flush through and go downhill underneath you and erode out the bottom. It'll enlarge the fissure until eventually the formation will fail and it'll happen dramatically. And when anyone who has had an earth fissure open up on their property or nearby, you know that it's always after a storm event. Because there's a big old rainstorm that was enough to kind of force it to, I can't hold on any further, and it's still open. So also, if you look in this Basin, I'm sure you've seen these signs. Not only are they possible, but they are possible to open up unexpectedly and over a roadway where you might be driving fast. These are legitimate geohazards. They are hazards. This one's an airless view. It's just one that I like to show because it opened up instantaneously in a single moment. It crosses the road through fence lines. But now that you know in your mind that it used to be hairline crack, it's because of subsidence in the bedrock ledge underneath. Now you know how they form. You go, oh, okay, I can see how that's a linear, like ridge line that's below the soil, right? Here's one that's in Arpaio Valley. This one I like to show because in certain sections, this one is over 30 feet deep. So they aren't just small that open up and they're like a couple feet deep. This one, if you were to fall into it, you could get seriously hurt. This is a picture of Queen Creek where someone was driving, you see the puddle of water, right? This one I just opened, but their front wheels made it over the hairline crack, but it opened up while they were driving over it. And so their back wheels got left in the fissure. I'm going to show next a really grainy, I'm sorry, but it's an old flip phone footage video that someone sent to us of this exact fissure opening up. So notice how much water is sheeting into that crack. It's not flowing over the crack and continuing, it's going somewhere. That means that there's void space openings underneath this person. I wouldn't be standing there filming right now if it were me, but it just goes to show just how much water is moving into that and eroding out the fissure. This next video here is from the AZGS. This is an earth fissure that opened up south of Arizona City. And this video is interesting. So he's in the fissure now. It just opened up. The drone is flying. It's just kind of looking at the wall. Yeah, it's about 10 feet or so deep, maybe 8 or 10 feet wide at the widest part. But that's not what's most impressive about this video. As the drone is flying higher, you start to get a sense of the scale of just how big this fissure is. And then he angles his camera forward. And you can see this fissure opened up overnight and it's several miles long. So what about here in Willcox? How about some photos around your guys' basin? Here's an image of a fissure looking right at the Sister Hills. There's a stock tank, there's fencing, there's property. You can see this one is actually really wide. So when this one opened up, this is a good 10, 12 feet wide. Here's one that opened up in 2023. This is a field geologist from the AZGS who's mapping it. You can see how this one just opened up after a fresh rainstorm. 2019 near Dragon Road. This is also from the AZGS. They sent to us and their survey, that's a survey GPS unit because they want to map and know where these fissures are. But you can see that there's a open void space here. And the only reason this block or chunk hasn't fallen as well is because those plants, the roots are actually holding that piece in place. Also, near Dragon Road, this is a couple of years later, here's a fissure that opened up that went under the road. So I wouldn't want to drive over this, it would be. There could be very little underneath keeping that asphalt in place. Here's a photo near Sulphur Hills from 2013 when one of our field geologists went out to collect a water level and couldn't get to the well site because the road was missing. That he's gone to every year and couldn't get past this point. Another photo from 2023. Here you can actually see that this piece here is going to be, the fissure continues by, right? Animal, like you have horses that are falling into fissures, like people, children, people, you just don't know. Like, is it barely being held together by like just surface tension and roots, you know, or is there void space underneath or not? So this is one of the photos that kind of gives me the chills every once in a while. Another shot near Dragon Road where you can see how it's gone underneath the asphalt, and it does continue off into the distance as well. Here's a fresh fissure that opened up, and you can see the roots are still reaching across from the plant, or from these shrubs over here. Photo near Sulphur Hills in 2021, where a chunk of the road is missing. So to summarize my portion of the presentation, groundwater levels in the basin have been declining significantly, right? So over 400 feet in some areas since we started recording. Land subsidence is significant and ongoing. Not only that, but the rate of subsidence is increasing. It's going up year over year. And there are at least 50 miles worth of mapped earth fissures, and likely more throughout the basin. And with that, I will hand it over to Natalie next.
Thank you, everybody. I know that's a lot of information, so I appreciate you all hanging in there with us. My name is Natalie Mask. I'm the Active Management Areas Director at ADWR. I'm going to be presenting a little bit about the existing water management options in current state law. Could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the Groundwater Management Act that was passed in 1980 is really the source of a lot of our statutory structure around groundwater management in the state of Arizona. That law created ADWR, created the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and also created certain regulations that apply statewide and also in specific areas that are referred to as irrigation non-expansion areas and active management areas. That law also authorized the establishment of new IMAs, irrigation non-expansion areas, and the AMAs, active management areas, by either local election or by initiation of the ADWR director. And I'll be talking a little bit about the process and criteria associated with each of those things. So right now, we have 6 AMAs and 3 IMAs. When the Groundwater Management Act was passed in 1980, we had 4 AMAs and 2 IMAs. So the original AMAs were Prescott, Phoenix, Canal, and Tucson. The Santa Cruz AMA was split out of the Tucson AMA in the mid-90s. So that is considered to be an initial AMA because it was that footprint was always regulated as an AMA since 1980. The Douglas AMA that I know many of you are familiar with was created in 2022. That was by a local election, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. We have 3 IMAs right now: Joseph City in northeastern Arizona, We have Park Wahela in central Arizona. Park Wahela was our first subsequent IMA that was created by order of the director, by initiation of the director in the early 80s. And the Wallapai Valley IMA is our most recent IMA, and that was also created in 2022. Next slide, please. So the kind of general structure here is one that is additive. What you can see here is that we have some regulations that apply statewide, and then additional regulations apply on top of those statewide regulations in an IMA, additional regulations apply on top of those regulations in an AMA. So statewide, we do require the registration of all wells. We also have provisions related to adequate water supply. And we have a requirement that community water systems submit annual reports and create system water plans. Sorry, still on that slide. In an IMA, in an irrigation non-expansion area, an irrigation non-expansion area is really what it sounds like. What it does is it freezes that footprint of irrigated agriculture. So you cannot expand the footprint of irrigated agriculture in an IMA, irrigation non-expansion area. In an IMA, there are also provisions related to measuring water use and reporting that water use on an annual basis. What an IMA does not do is limit the volume of that water use. There aren't any volumetric requirements on water use in an IMA, or any conservation requirements or requirements to reduce total water use over time. An active management area is also kind of what it sounds like. It is a more active version of groundwater management. So again, this is an additive structure. So we still have those statewide requirements. We still have the irrigation non-expansion provisions and measuring and reporting. And we also have more stringent requirements under assured water supply for new developments. We have management goals, management plans, and mandatory conservation programs that are required to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. And we have volumetric grandfathered rights and withdrawal permits and other types of volumetric conservation requirements that do move toward reducing groundwater withdrawals over time in an active management area. Now the next slide. Thank you. So in an active management area, you can see on that last slide that the active management area is really the highest level of groundwater regulation that we have in our current regulatory structures. And it's also the highest level of groundwater protections that we have in our current management structures. So like I said, there is measuring and reporting. That measuring and reporting helps Ryan's group for our active management areas in developing their models, making sure that we have good reported data, robust, thorough, comprehensive data going into those models. So for measuring and reporting in an IMA and an AMA, folks with non-exempt wells, or typically wells that are larger than 35 gallons per minute, are required to measure their water use and report that water use on an annual basis. In an active management area, we also have what we refer to as a well impact analysis requirement. And this requirement requires new non-exempt wells, so new larger wells, to do a hydrologic analysis and review whether they are going to negatively impact nearby wells, and it might limit the volume that is allowed to be used out of that well based on the results of that analysis. In an active management area, there is also mandatory conservation. So in an active management area, a part of the management plan is conservation programs. So we have conservation programs for agricultural, municipal, and industrial water users. And those conservation programs are required by statute to be designed to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. So again, this is that volumetric component in an AMA, move toward a goal in active management area. The last item on this list here is assured water. Assured water supply is what you'll often hear folks refer to as the 100-year water supply requirement. And this is really focused on new housing developments and is really intended as a consumer protection for those homeowners, making sure that there is water available to support those new developments over the 100-year period. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, with all that background, these next slides talk about how new IMAs or AMAs can be created. So a part of that 1980 Groundwater Management Act was that included provisions on how subsequent AMAs and IMAs might be able to be created. So for both AMAs and IMAs, there are methods in state law that allow for local initiation or initiation by the AWR director to establish new AMAs and IMAs. So under that local initiation category, you can kind of see the process here for each of these. For an IMA or an AMA, there can be a local petition related to establishing a new IMA or AMA in a basin. The result of a petition for an IMA is a hearing, consideration of specific criteria, and then a decision by the director. The result of a petition for an AMA is a local election, and that's precisely what happened here just a couple of years ago, where there were local petitions for both Willcox and Douglas to consider whether to establish an AMA in each of those basins. Upon the certification of a local election, the majority vote makes that determination. In 2022, the majority vote in Willcox was to not establish an AMA. In 2022, the majority vote in Douglas was to establish an AMA. So that's how the Douglas AMA was created as the first ever subsequent. I want to do
Really short?
criteria here. So what you see, there are two criteria in the IMA process that AWR has to consider as a part of the hearing process. There are two criteria. You'll note that there is an and in between those criteria. In order for an IMA to be
Tomorrow. Yeah.
or it check both of those boxes. The first box being that there is insufficient groundwater for irrigation rates of withdrawal. The second criteria being that establishment of an AMA is not necessary.
I need to work in the morning.
I'm going to ask the folks on the webinar to please see muted. We will have time for comments in just a couple of minutes. Thank you. And slide, perfect. So I know the slide on the webinar is a little bit delayed, but it will we'll get there. All right. So this slide shows the processes for director designation of an AMA or an IMA. So like I said, there's two methods. There's either local initiation or the AWR director can initiate a process to consider whether to designate an area as a subsequent IMA or AMA. The processes here are pretty similar to each other, where if the director decides to initiate a process for an IMA or an AMA, you have a hearing, a public hearing and comment period. We have a consideration of the comments and criteria, and then a decision by the AWR director. What you'll notice here is that the consideration of the IMA, like I pointed out on the last item, we have an and statement here on the left side and or statements on the right hand side. So, and for an IMA, it has to meet both of these criteria. For an AMA, it only has to check any one of these criteria. So, for an IMA, we have those two criteria that I pointed out on the last slide.
insufficient groundwater for irrigation and current permits of withdrawal, and that an AMA is not necessary according to these AMA criteria. If the director initiates an AMA process, there's a hearing and consideration of criteria that includes active management practices are necessary to preserve groundwater supplies, or land subsidence or fishery is endangering property or groundwater storage capacity, or use of groundwater is resulting in or threatening water quality degradation. To just reiterate that both of these processes have this process of hearing, consideration of the comments and these specific statutory criteria, and then a decision by the ADWR director. So just to summarize it really quickly, and then we'll get into comments. We know we're running long here. There are two existing structures in state law for groundwater regulation. And each of those structures has different levels of regulatory requirements and of protections. Those two structures are IMAs and AMAs. Those two structures can be established either by locally initiated processes or by processes initiated by the ADWR director. And we have specific mandatory criteria that have to be considered as a part of those specific statutory processes. So with that, I know we have a handful of comment cards that we've already received. I'm going to hand things back off to Lainey to kind of coordinate starting to receive questions. Thank you all for hanging in there with us.
Thank you, Ryan and Natalie, for those presentations. I am going to ask folks, if possible, to come up to the front to ask your question, just so that we have the best chance of folks online being able to hear. All the equipment is kind of up here and we're moving it around so that they have a better chance of hearing you. So to ensure that everyone who wishes to have the opportunity to ask a question may limit time for each speaker. And if you have not already done so and wish to ask a question, please fill out a speaker card virtually or physically and return it to the DWR staff in the back. We do have a QR code. Oh, we can go to the next slide. Sorry. We do have a QR code up there for folks online if you have not already submitted that for the form. So we'll call people up in the order that we received cards, and I'll alternate with those folks that are online. And we are accepting additional questions not presented today by 5:00 p.m. on October 4th. Those can be sent to our docket supervisor, whose contact information will be on the next slide. So for our first speaker, I have Steve Keisel. And if I say your name incorrectly, please correct.
Thank you. My name is Steve Keisel. I've been an Arizona resident for almost 60 years. I lived in the Sunside Hills area for the last 25 years. Our well was drilled in 1993 at static water level of 230 feet. In 2012, less than 20 years later, we had to deepen that well. The water level had dropped to about 340 feet. We had considerably expanded the well was deepened. And now here we are 12 years later, and our well has dropped another 40 feet. We've averaged almost, do the math, from 230 feet when it's drilled in 1993 to 2024 when it's already been down to 380 feet, although the ODR has come out here this year. It may even be deeper than that. That's almost 5 feet a year. So it's right in line. Near Coach's stronghold area. So, and sadly, on your sandwich ball had to keep the wells. And we've had neighbors that have not been able to keep the wells, they're not hauling water. So I wanted to emphasize this problem has been going on for quite a while. We've had dry wells. I know you only have one dry well reported. I got one of my first questions, can you report dry wells retroactive? So, because there's, I can guarantee there's a lot more than one out there, and I know three, at least 3 or 4, right?
If you know the date, you probably know that too. So if you have a date, sorry, this might become a little language. If you know when it went dry and you have the registration number, I can have that information.
And then the question, I have a few other questions and comments. I really appreciate your presentation, Brian. I think you gave a compelling case for the need to protect the groundwater basin here, the local groundwater in the Willcox Basin. Some of the pictures were pretty dramatic, and I can tell you, as a fisher in the fishery, when they opened up or started to open up after the early heavy rainstorm about 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, less than 5 miles from the house. One of my questions is, do you have evidence for any documentation of the actual property damage occurred? Because I know there are houses near there. I know we've got a lot of road repair. I've heard that there's been some major pipelines ruptured. How many wells have been damaged by the science and fishing and so forth?
No, we do not. That's one of those things that would be hard to find as well, because I know that a lot of the road repair is done in the county. I believe if they keep a record of what their expenditures were and how they do that. I think there's some roads where they actually put the asphalt out and left it as graded dirt because it's easier to repair as additional figures of it out. But I haven't seen any study or information on property damages.
That would be valuable, I think, to see that, as well as the costs of homeowners for other repairs. The other question, it kind of amazes me that I thought I saw some data just from a few years ago that the miles of fishers in the area was about 42, I think it was either 38 or 40 miles, and that's up to 49 miles now, is that correct?
As of July 2023. So I believe that number has gone up since then in the last year. But the way that we calculated that is we took the mapped fisher data from EZGS, and then we did our own summation. So we added up ourselves, and that's the number that we got was 48.7, I think.
So to me, that's a pretty dramatic increase, and only living about 5 miles from an existing fisherman, they may actually be running through my park. I mean, you don't know because the cracks may just not be that evident.
Right.
Okay. So the question that I have is, why haven't we done anything about this problem until now? And I'm not asking you, right? I know you can't answer that necessarily, but I would direct people's attention to the packet that we provide. It's a timeline of action on rural. It says timeline of rural communities seeking groundwater solutions. So it's not like anything hasn't been trying to be done. We've been trying to do things about this for a while. And clearly legislative inaction in this case amounts to a form of negligence in this case because of all the damage that's being occurring by wells, fishery in societies and so forth. So I would just encourage everyone here to recognize this problem, urgent need to address this problem. My sense is that we should probably initiate the INA. I would support the initiation of the INA designation process.
Thank you. Because we're short on time, we do want to make sure we have enough time for everybody to ask their questions.
Thank you. Next is Mark Dorby. And while we're talking, I just wanted to let everybody know that any questions that we're not able to answer today, including any questions that are submitted to our docket supervisor through October 4th, we will be posting answers if we have answers online on our webpage with the Willcox Basin.
Well, I guess I'd ask not to be first in a second. The Evan's here, I can use some lessons. So there's no hope. My name is Mark Kirby. My wife and I moved here 15 years ago. Could you hear me? 15 years ago to plant a vineyard, to be part growing wine industry. We drilled the well in 2009. Since then, the water has dropped a whopping 100 feet. That was a number I saw up there, so it looks familiar. And folks, I do not think that's okay. When we came here, people talked about the water going down just a little each year. Nothing to worry about. When the time comes, we'll take care of it. Folks, that time has come again and again. This time, we really need to take care of this. I used to say that I didn't know how to ask the farmers. I didn't know how to ask the farmers to stop farming. Now I don't think we can avoid it. It's going to take mandates, that means legislation. We need to bring the aquifer into balance, and we need to transition to a new economy that works for all the an economy based on water security rather than on draining the aquifer. Now, when there's a problem, we like to see what other people have done, similar situation, what worked and what didn't. And here we go. In the 70s, Nebraska saw water levels going down in their Ogallala aquifer and decided to manage their aquifer for safe use. Today, Nebraska is a thriving ag economy based on water security, a lesson in what worked. Another example, Kansas decided to not protect their aquifer. Now Kansas is hurting. Here's a headline from last June, stateline.org. Time for a reckoning. After decades of local inaction, Kansas lawmakers are pushing for big changes in irrigation. Right now in Arizona, we have a bipartisan majority in the state legislature and a governor that wants to pass groundwater legislation like House Bill 2857. One person has stood in the way, Gal. In the absence of legislation, I support an AMA in place, putting an AMA in place to stop the further expansion of wells and farms, and then keep on working on the better groundwater legislation. So my question is, sorry, will you please, or can you, tonight, briefly sketch out how an AMA could be used to bring our aquifer into balance? That's what. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey.
Thank you for the comment question. Today's meeting is intended as an informational meeting, and I wouldn't want to speculate on the precise policies that would be created if this area were to sometime become an AMA. A part of an AMA is developing a management goal and specific customized management plans to the area with a lot of local stakeholder engagement. Jackie here in the front row has been a big part of that process in Douglas, and she can tell you how long that takes and also how much stakeholder involvement that takes to work through the details of all of that. So there is a lot of customization that is available through that process. So it wouldn't really be fair for me to try to speculate on what exactly might happen if that type of structure were established in Willcox, because it would be developed in collaboration with a lot of local stakeholders.
Yeah, I would just add that it mainly comes down to conservation, reducing the pumping, combined with recharge, increasing the inflows.
Our next speaker is Melanie Lawrence.
First, I want to say thank you very much to ADWR for putting on an amazing informative presentation for us to learn more about this issue. So my question is, if subsidence means a loss for storage, then will recharge efforts make any difference? And this is not to say that we should not be doing recharge, but from the presentation, it seemed like it might not be working.
If we were to aggressively recharge the aquifer, there would be more water put back into the system, but it wouldn't be the same volume that was occupying it before the subsidence occurred. So when subsidence occurs, there's now less pore space for the water to be recharged. There's still pore space there. You can still recharge it. You'll see the water level go up in the well. But if you were to take that water and measure it in a bucket and say, how much water was that? The volume of water would be less by some percentage, and that's highly contingent on the soil type. So it's hard to quantify. It would have to be, it would be variable across the whole basin. It'd be very good.
And then the other question then is, in some of your mapping, is there any way to know where future fissures might occur? Do we already know where some of these areas?
So the primary mechanism for the fissures occurring is the subsidence itself. If there is no subsidence, even if there are rock piles underneath you, if the land is not subsiding, fissures won't open. So the biggest indicator is the subsidence maps. When you say, where is the subsidence really like happening? And those areas will be just areas that are high risk. The next thing you could do is, we actually are updating or trying to update, because you can't see where the bedrock is below the soil, right? But you can use certain gravity instruments that will let you measure the gravity and try to pinpoint where it gets really dense below you and say, maybe that's a bedrock. And so we're actually in the middle of updating some gravity data to try to better understand the depth of bedrock contours. So we do have some maps. The AZGS has a lot of maps of that as well. But the better resolution we can get on that, the more helpful it will be for justice reason. If we know that there's a subsurface or a ridge or artifact that we can see, we'd like to know where that is, right? So that, because that's what we're going to do. So there's something that you can do, but it is a hard thing to do. It's not very simple and straightforward. It requires a specialist to do it too.
Awesome. All right, and then the last, I just understood that, for me to just come up here and go, where are you gonna get the AMA? It's not something you guys can answer. I understand that, but what can we do as concerned citizens? Do we go to our legislators? What do we do to say we really need a solution to this?
I'll hand that one off because I'm the science guy, right?
So you're spot on with your evaluation there, that we definitely can't say something is going to be created. ADWR's role as a state agency is to implement the statutes, the laws as they're written. So what we've laid out tonight is what those existing processes are. Outside of those existing processes, any changes to state law obviously does have to go through the legislature.
I would also say that you're taking a good step tonight, coming here, listening, asking questions. And you're also welcome to send comments to our docket supervisor. Of course, what we're really trying to do at this stage is answer questions for the community. And then if we were to take action, if we were to initiate any sort of formal proceedings on the director's initiative, then there would certainly be another opportunity for comments from residents of the community. And we would ask that everyone make their comments, make yourself heard at that time too. So it's not just about tonight, but it's also about anything else that happens in the future. Continue to communicate with us. We appreciate hearing from you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Next is Sonia Gosho, and then after her will be Cheryl Knott.
Good evening, it's Gasho, by the way, which is funny, but, so Ryan and I had a conversation at the presidential
Council on Science and Technology. And he expressed frustration that why don't people just believe the data? And my answer to Ryan at the time was, it's not about the data. We all agree that there's subsidence and wells going dry. It's about who gets that data and what they want to use it for. And so Ed talked about how do we manage, and that is the question we need to answer. Not if there's issues, not whose well is going dry, although that is vitally important, and I've had to fix my own dry well, but it's how do we manage? Conservation and recharge projects without regulatory oversight first do work. I've done many conservation activities on my own ranch, and we don't have to have that regulatory oversight to implement conservation. What we do have to have is working together. The safe yield or equilibrium has not been reached in any active management area that has been established, even with incoming CAP water in 45 years. So the idea that we will reach equilibrium simply by stopping pumping is not realistic. What we need is flexibility and certainty. That allows the room to adapt technology as it comes along so that we can adopt water saving measures without putting any segment of our community out of business and our economic base. The AMA is the wrong tool, and you all said that 2 years ago. Natalie, your presentation's gotten better, but it's the same one we heard 2 years ago. And we had a serious effort in our legislature this year, and that was SB 1221. And that was all of us coming together. And in the end, it was voted down because state and national environmental groups like the Sierra Club were given preference over local residents and stakeholders. So we need to find a solution. I believe we can. I agree with Ed. We need to dream about what we can and cannot do, but we have to work together. And an AMA is not the right tool. Thank you.
Thank you. And Cheryl.
I've lived in the Pierce area for 22 years. Cochise County used to have a zoning ordinance limiting the size of industrial dairy feedlots. Microphone training. In 2011, State Senator Frank Antonori sponsored a bill that took away the county's right to zone dairy feedlots. David Gowan, Gail Griffin, Peggy Judd, and David Stevens were in the legislature when Governor Brewer signed that bill into law. They took away local control to benefit the ferry dairy. In 2014, Gowan, Griffin, Stevens, and the director of ABWR at the time attended a meeting with residents who wanted conserving groundwater. Our elected and appointed officials refused to do anything. That meeting was on October 30th of 2014. On December 30th, Riverview bought the ferry and dairy in Kansas, on Kansas Settlement Road for $38 million in cash. What we now have is corporate control of the groundwater under the tens of thousands of acres that Riverview owns. Riverview's hundreds of pumps are efficient at extracting billions of gallons of groundwater year after year. Their efficient extraction is the enemy of conservation. Riverview is in a class by itself and it should be treated as such. I would urge ADWR to use its legal authority to begin a groundwater conservation effort that starts with Riverview by requiring an immediate, verifiable reduction in Riverview's groundwater use by at least 50% immediately, not in some fantasy world 35 years from now. The biggest player doing the most harm deserves the biggest cut to do the most good. I don't have a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up would be Rona McMillan, and after that, Philip Plum.
Hi, my name is Rona McMillan. With my husband, we own a vineyard south of Willcox in the Kansas Settlement area. So all numbers that we saw tonight, we're very familiar with. Have real life examples in our own vineyard. We are growing a low water use crop, which we think is very suitable for the dry environment that we are all operating in here. But we are surrounded by other agriculture that is pumping and over pumping this aquifer, so that we are in danger in our own local business, and the wine industry in this valley is under threat as well. My question for whoever made a video, do you have future projections? We have a lot of data here that takes us through to your last samples. Do you do forward projections of where we will be in, say, 5 years? How many wells will put on dry in 5 years? I know you have data for when wells are drilled at the static level at that point, but can you give us any information about where we'll be in 5 years or 10 years? Thank you.
No, we don't have any future projections for the Willcox Basin.
Out there, yeah.
A small addition to Brian's comment there, we don't have specific projections on kind of a geospatial basis or with a model, but we did last year put out a supply and demand report that included the Willcox Basin. That report is on our website and included some data and projections at the basin scale. So not necessarily directly answering your question, but it's some high-level projections at the base level.
Okay. There's not one thing about, there's some talk about water recharge. I have the best water recharge system in this whole county. It's nothing but sugar sand. I've talked to Whitfield jump to talk to, because they say you gotta find someone to own the job and do this, that, and I can't get to pass the first page that you got. So if you guys want water recharge, I can take the water, dump the down bucket on it, and it won't move 2 feet. It goes straight in there. Okay? And Lake Cochise is the damn sewer pump. Okay? I don't know who keeps coming up with Lake Cochise and be like, well, that's fine, but it's the sewer pump. Okay? And that's all I have to say. If you guys want to talk to me about water recharge and the place to do it, get your pencils out, 520-253-0114. I will take you anytime, any day, no matter. You want to see what we can do. Bye.
Thank you. Next is Mickey Graham, and then we'll take some online questions after that. Is Mickey Graham still with us in the crowd? All right. So we're gonna take some online questions. Joanne Weiner, are you still with us? And can you hear us? Joanne Weiner? All right, how about Vance Williams? And if anyone's having trouble unmuting themselves, please put that in the chat and we can do that for you. All right, how about Trisha G? Trisha G, are you still online? All right, how about Brad Couch? And if folks are having any trouble unmuting themselves, please put that in the chat. All right, how about John Graffield? All right, we will try some online folks again in a minute. Here with us in person, Ray Billy. I'm sure there's a background. Please state it the correct way.
Thank you very much. Don't fall asleep here late today for me. I own a ranch in Dragon, the edge of the Willcox Basin with a well. And also own a property in the county with a well. And I've been with many places in the country, with places, dry places, with wells for okay since 3 years. Our family who are farmers, so I do have some understanding of this. I've done water conservation, rainwater harvesting very successfully. And I have a neighbor in my place in the county who drilled a well 1,000 feet deep and got 1 gallon an hour. They'd already built their house, unfortunately. They did rainwater harvesting. They put about 4,000 square feet of gathering area, 20,000 gallons of tanks, and they've been fine for 15 years. So I would say, in preparation for my question to you all, given it's a scientific fact, given the rainfall with a sufficient square footage on a small city lot, do rainwater harvesting and provide all your water. Why does anybody need a well? Nobody really needs a well. It's cheaper than drilling a well too. I just spent over $40,000 drilling a well in Dragon. Rainwater is cheap. If that's the case, then why are we even regulating wells at all? Why do you guys even exist? Okay? Because from a residential perspective, you can do without it. Okay? And if you're talking about ag users, they're private businesses. Let them worry about their own business. If they abuse the water, they run out of it, let them go out of business. And why do you have to do what you're doing? I want my private property rights protected. I think there's solutions that can be done that will save money, not need to go through all this government stuff. I'd also like to say that my family came from the Soviet Union, where there was communism and socialism. They took away private property rights. In the end, the people starved to death. When they objected to the foolish totalitarian government they put in place, they murdered them. Don't make that mistake here. So my question to you guys is, why do you need to regulate this? You can do rainwater harvesting. You don't even need a well.
So ADWR's role as a state agency is to implement the statute that exists. As far as typical households go, we certainly encourage conservation measures and efficient use of available water sources such as rainwater harvesting or other types of conservation measures. Under an IMA or an AMA, I would want to clarify that most household level wells would not be subject to, regulation of those structures. Those small wells that are under 35 gallons per minute, or 35 gallons per minute or less, that aren't using the wells to irrigate 2 or more acres and that aren't using 10 acre feet or more for a non-irrigation use, those wells are referred to as exempt because those wells are exempt from the types of reporting and conservation requirements that exist under an AM.
So folks online, I just want to give another opportunity if anybody that had submitted a question, Joanne Weiner, Vance Williams, Trisha G, Brad Couch, or Don Raphael. We do have a submitted question, so we can post any answers to that on our webpage at a later date. Lisa Glenn.
First, I would also like to thank ADWR for this presentation tonight. It's probably one of the finest I've seen, and I really do thank you. My name is Lisa Glenn. My husband, Lloyd, grew up here in Willcox, and together we have lived in Willcox 57 years. We built our house on acreage outside of the city, put in a well, and raised 2 wonderful children. I taught elementary school for 25 years, and Lloyd started his feed school business. It's been a good run. Yet over the decades, we have become increasingly concerned as friends and neighbors. Small farmers and homeowners began to have their wells go dry, some moving out or selling to big ag. We have seen fissures open and close rooms. A friend's house actually cracked in 2 by subsidence. Friends buying large water tanks as backup, or actually hauling water from the city, which now has its own water concerns. Our well is only 100 feet deep. We have sulfur water underneath. It held 80 feet of water when it was put in. But when we had it measured earlier this year, it had dropped 34.8 feet. So we just have 55.2 feet of water in our well. Did that water drop over time or more rapidly in just a few years of excessive groundwater? We have put all our plants on a drip system and cut down on the water we put around our pine trees. But as it gets hotter and drier, we are afraid that they will dry out and actually fall on our house. We have all seen these water crises coming. We have watched as more and more high water users put in hundreds and pump deep. Yet at no time has any water regulation plan even been heard in the legislative committee. Lloyd and I are both over 80 now, and we may have health concerns in the future. Would we be able to sell our property if we needed to? What would it be worth? Will there be anything left for our children? I heard the word certainty tonight. Lloyd and I would like some certainty, and I met many people who live in this valley. These are the concerns of the entire community. It is way past time to address the unsustainable rate of groundwater depletion in our excessive water use that harms others is not a property. I would like to thank ADWR for the presentation today, and would ask that ADWR step in and put management area plan in place. The Willcox groundwater basin has long all three qualifications for AMA action. Thank you.
Thank you. We are winding down to the last few speakers, so I just want to give folks another opportunity online to submit a comment or question card. Excuse me, if you have any questions, and folks in the room as well. Is Mark Spencer online? Mark Spencer. All right, then Gail Griffin.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the department for being here, and I'd like to thank the audience here. You're competing against the county fair and the candidate forum and some sites this evening, so thank you for being here. We do have solutions. We were charged with looking at something in between an INA and an AMA, something a little bit more than an INA, but something less than an AMA. This past session, we had 111 meetings on Senate Bill 1221. I'm going to use the table here. 1221 did come up with a comprehensive plan. The most comprehensive groundwater management components is the 1980 Groundwater Act. It was developed by local stakeholders and groundwater users in each affected basins of the three basins that were mentioned earlier, which Willcox is part of. It gives additional tools between irrigation and expansion and active management areas and results in real significant long-term conservation benefits for the aquifer. Some of the framework includes closing the basins and new pumping, 5-member local council, groundwater reduction requirements, economic impact statements, municipalities made up management practices. I have some flyers, so before you leave, if you'd like to have one of these on 1221 and work that the legislature did this year. We had it up until the last day of session, which was on a Saturday. We had meetings with both parties, Democrats and Republicans, with the governor's staff. We submitted our last proposal on a Monday or Tuesday, I don't remember which day it was, with the amendments that we were going to submit on the last day of session, which was a Saturday. I went over to and they said they would get back to us. Didn't hear anything, so on the floor of the House, I went over to the Democrat individual that we were working with and asked him, did you read the amendments? I didn't hear any comments. Are you on board with us? This is our chance to pass on for the three basins in challenge for our county. His comment was, we were hoping to get the Sierra Club on board to be neutral. We weren't able, so none of us will be voting for this plan. So it did not get out of the House. Wasn't for lack of trying. True. I do also have a flyer on the difference between 2557 and 1221. If you like, have copies of this. We do have solutions. Recharge basins. Thank you for all the work you're doing on recharge basins. We need to do more. Reuse technology. I'm visiting farms that are cutting 1/3% of their water because of the new technology. 95 to 98% of the water in the rains we get evaporates before it gets in the ground. Let's put it in the ground. Forming a water district, as was mentioned several years ago, domestic water district is one of the solutions. I'd be happy to work with anybody on it. My door is always open. I'd be happy to talk to anybody after the meeting. I'm here listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we've had a few more folks submit a question, so we're going to go back to Mark Spencer and see if we can unmute him. While we work on that, Representative Dunn, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hey, good evening. Thank you for allowing me to ask questions. I appreciate Gil Griffin's comments, and since this is a question and answer period, I won't elaborate as far as commentary, except the fact that Willcox should not be.
Mr. Dunn, if you're speaking, we can't hear you, so give us just a moment, I'll troubleshoot. All right, I'm going to read Mr. Dunn's submitted question, and then you can just let me know in the chat if there was anything additional. He asked, does the info provided allow AMA to be designated?
So today's meeting is informational and would not, or does not represent a determination by the court. There is a formal legal process that ADWR would to go through in order to consider the designation of and a part of that would be comments, formal hearings, statutory timelines, that type of thing, to allow us to consider those statutory criteria for an AMA that we discussed earlier.
Thank you, Natalie. And, please let me know in the chat if there's anything additional. Mark asked if we do nothing, how many more non-exempt wells or notice of intent to drill such are already in place to be drilled in the next few years?
So I don't believe we have any projections or anything like that related to non-exempt wells. I know one of Ryan's slides showed the historical contributions for exempt and non-exempt wells. In most of the state, in an area that does not have an INA or an AMA overlay, well permitting is really a notification process. That process is called a notice of intent to drill. And ADWR does not have the authority in those areas to deny a drill permit for new wells. So it would be really a matter of the number of applications that were submitted that would kind of dictate the number of wells that might come in.
I can see John Garfield, you're still on. Can you try to unmute yourself? We want to try something else. If not, I will read your question as well.
Hello? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, John.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, so my question was, which now I don't have in front of me, is has anybody presented a summary of all this information on subsidence, aquifer subsidence to any of the large farm entities in the valley? Have they actually seen or received any of this?
Well, what I can say is that all of our data that we collect, when we collect it, is almost immediately available publicly. But I have not been aware of my staff presenting for any large farm for dairies. At least not in the last 2 years.
Okay, so probably not. Unless they sought it out.
Correct. Not in the last 2 years.
Okay, well, that's all I had.
Thank you. And Mr. Dunn, I saw you had another question, Kat, that I didn't also read, but you may be able to unmute yourself now if you'd like to ask a question.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for that. And my question is, you answered the question about the AMA, if it's been established or the rules have been established, but has the department done an analysis on if you establish an INA, what the rate of decline would be with the ongoing pumping as opposed to what we were trying to do with the bill, the stuff that Mr. Griffin had talked about? So what would the rate of decline be under an INA proposal?
ADWR has not done that type of analysis comparing those types of projections for baseline.
Oh, sorry, yeah, but I think that under an INA, it would not limit the pumping. So the pumping would likely continue at the current rate or it could increase.
And that's my question, because that's important for the public to understand what an INA does compared to what an AMA does. And as you run the numbers to establish, and if you can't have them now, to give those back to the public, what, if you do an AMA like you're working with Douglas, what is the restrictions going to do to get to the proposed goal, as opposed to what an INA does, and what is that planned depletion, as opposed to other options that we've been working on? And I don't think, I was trying to say earlier, I don't think Willcox should be held hostage while we try to negotiate a statewide policy, because we do understand that Willcox and the other two basins are in dire need of something to happen. So those are important for the constituents down there to understand. And I would like, if you can't get that now, maybe you can get that information back to those citizens.
One thing I would say to that is kind of similar to the answer I gave earlier, that we can't necessarily speculate about what a management goal or conservation requirements might be if there was to be a process initiated in an AMA established in Willcox, because so much of that requires an extensive stakeholder process, and there's a lot of customization and really creativity that can go into the process of developing those requirements. So we wouldn't want to speculate on what those requirements or the management goal or anything like that might be for a theoretical Willcox statement.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes all of the questions that we've received online and in person. I'd like to remind everyone that additional questions not presented today can be sent to our docket supervisor. Her contact information is on the screen, and that can be sent to her by 5 p.m. on October 4th, 2024. All of the questions that we receive and answers that we can provide will be posted on the Willcox webpage on EWR's website. That link is also on the screen. With that, I'd like to thank everyone who has come in person and participated online, providing really robust comments and questions. We appreciate your participation, and with that, this meeting is concluded.
Yeah, right. Gosh,